and Joan Shingang, I'm going to pronounce it, Shanga Kawawa.
One thing that we've established with last year's presidential election is that Democrats lie. Now, I'm not saying every single member of the party is a liar, but there is a common denominator here. Democrats are willing to lie if it places them in power. They're also willing to lie to keep themselves in power. Now, this was very evident within the Biden-Harris administration. It was also pretty clear with the political commentators that had Kamala Harris winning despite what the polls were saying. We'll get to them in a second. Now, I'm also covering the resignation of Canada's Justin Trudeau and what this could mean for the Trump administration. But I want to go ahead and start things off with Senator Chuck Schumer. Now, apparently, he didn't lie about President Biden's mental capacity, meaning that all of us were wrong and they were right. And guys, before we get started, I just want to say thanks so much for being here. Thanks for hitting the like button and supporting the channel. Thank you for all the new subscribers. I really appreciate you guys growing the family here on YouTube. Let's jump in.
Obviously, there has been a lot of focus on President Biden's role in this. You were obviously in close contact with President Biden well before the public tuned into that debate that ultimately led to him stepping down. I want to play you a little bit of something you said last year. Take a look.
I talk to President Biden, regularly, sometimes several times in a week, or usually several times in a week. His mental acuity is great. It's fine. It's as good as it's been over the years. All this right-wing propaganda that his mental acuity has declined is wrong.
Leader Schumer, what do you say to Americans who feel as though you and other top Democrats misled them about President Biden's mental acuity?
No. Look, we didn't, and let's look at President Biden. He's had an amazing record. The legislation we passed, one of the most significant groups of legislation since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, putting in 235 judges, a record, and he's a patriot. He's a great guy, and when he stepped down, he did it on his own because he thought it was better not only for the Democratic Party, for America. We should all salute him. We should all salute him.
Do you feel, as we have this conversation today, that President Biden could serve another 4 years had he stayed in the race and potentially won?
Well, I'm not going to speculate. As I said, I think his record is a stellar one, and he'll go down in history as a really outstanding president.
Now, you guys could play that again if you want, but the message is that there's nothing wrong with President Biden's mental acuity. Can you believe that? Even though the White House insiders have already revealed to us the truth. Now, like I said, these Democrats, they're going to keep lying to the American people no matter what the cost is. So what Chuck Schumer is doing is defending their lie until the bitter end. And I do have to note that Christian Walker sounds like a completely different person when she's interviewing a Democrat, compared, of course, to when she's interviewing Donald Trump, let's say. Speaking of which, he's also sticking to the idea that Joe Biden's mental challenges is merely right-wing propaganda. Now, remind me again if this propaganda was clear with his debate against Trump, because he proved to the entire nation and the world that our country did not have a president that was at least mentally present. But since they lost so badly, some Democrats are now willing to admit their mistakes, even though their previous statements misled those within their party.
Longtime Democratic strategist James Carville out with the new New York Times op-ed. It's titled, "I was wrong about the 2024 election. Here's why." And he writes, quote, "Perception is everything in politics, and a lot of Americans perceive us, as in the Democrats, as out to lunch on the economy, not feeling their pain, or caring too much about other things instead."
Wow. This op-ed is fascinating in the New York Times by Carville. And then he says, first of all, we've got to stop making Mr. Trump our main focus. He can't be elected again. Then he goes on to say the first thing we have to do, the central message is we're going to go after Republicans' tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. Then we go after the rest.
First of all, I totally agree with that person. It's very depressing. But if you're doing political strategy, if you have an airplane crash, you got to go back and find out what went wrong. You don't say, well, let's just forget about it and move on. No, was the flap set in the right setting, or, was there something that the pilot didn't pay attention to? I don't know, but it is sort of depressing. But, Michael, there's a simple basic rule of politics is voters want an election about them. They don't want an election about you or your opponent. And for too much, we lost that. I lost it myself. We made it about Trump, and we didn't make it about voters. And it's never a good idea. And how could I, at 80 years old, been doing this for 50 years, lapse into that level of stupidity? You know, I got to ask myself. But I think we did, and you know, let's learn from this. It's a disaster. I agree. It's depressing, but to have an event like this and not learn from it, I think is the biggest mistake we can make.
Did he just admit to having Trump derangement syndrome? Because many of these political strategists from the left have TDS. And I think a lot of us have made it perfectly clear that we wanted to hear policies over propaganda. So many voters just kept waiting for Kamala Harris to introduce her policies, but she just always kept her focus on Trump. This party has lost its vision, and it's solely focused on keeping Trump out of power. And that led to one of the most embarrassing losses for them. Not because they lost by a landslide, but because they used every single medium that they could to try and discredit Trump. They went on social media, they went on mainstream liberal media news outlets. They even went so far as to have rhinos like Liz Cheney join Kamala Harris on the campaign trail. None of it worked though. They even had him called a convicted felon. I can't tell you how many times I've seen t-shirts or hats or even mugs saying, "I voted for the felon." Did you? And yet the majority of this nation understood that it was all propaganda. And in the end, they voted for the guy that they think cares the most about the American people. But don't look now, because they seem to be setting up Chuck Schumer for a higher leadership position.
In 2 weeks, you will be the highest ranking Democrat serving in Washington. Do you believe you will be the leader of the Democratic Party?
Look, I think we have a lot of great leaders in our party. We have a great bench of people coming up, and I am really optimistic about the future of the Democratic Party in the future. As I said, there are certain adjustments we have to make. We're going to do those, and I think people are going to realize that the Democratic Party is the party of working families, of working people. We're doing more for them. We're going to show them that some of these Republican things, like tax cuts for the very wealthy individuals, which were they did it in 2017 and they lost the election in 2018. They haven't learned, but we're going to hold their feet to the fire when they do things that hurt working people. We're going to stand with the working families of America, and that's going to bode very well for us.
Somebody needs to remind Chuck that they lost with the economy, which means that the average American doesn't believe in this shtick that they're here for the working class, because the working class has been paying for illegal immigrants that they allowed to cross through our borders. The working class has been suffering for the last 4 years, and this is one of the reasons as to why Trump won. But of course, the Democratic Party, they're not going to admit that to themselves. But here's someone who understood that it was just time to quit. Justin Trudeau has officially resigned as the leader of the Liberal Party. He's also resigned as Canada's Prime Minister.
We're seeing Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau step up to the microphone now. Let's listen in.
Bon matin. Every morning I've woken up as Prime Minister. I've been inspired by the resilience, the generosity, and the determination of Canadians. It is the driving force of every single day I have the privilege of serving in this office. That is why, since 2015, I've fought for this country, for you, to strengthen and grow the middle class. Why we rallied to support each other through the pandemic, to advance reconciliation, to defend free trade on this continent, to stand strong with Ukraine and our democracy, and to fight climate change and get our economy ready for the future. We are at a critical moment in the world. You all know I'm a fighter. Every bone in my body has always told me to fight because I care deeply about Canadians. I care deeply about this country, and I will always be motivated by what is in the best interest of Canadians. And the fact is, despite best efforts to work through it, Parliament has been paralyzed for months after what has been the longest session of a minority parliament in Canadian history. That's why this morning I advised the Governor-General that we need a new session of Parliament. She has granted this request, and the House will now be prorogued until March 24th. Over the holidays, I've also had a chance to reflect and have had long talks with my family about our future. Throughout the course of my career, any success I have personally achieved has been because of their support and with their encouragement. So last night over dinner, I told my kids about the decision that I'm sharing with you today. I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process. Last night, I asked the president of the Liberal Party to begin that process. This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
Now, Canada's not in the clear just yet because we're still in the dark as to who's going to replace Justin Trudeau. You know what I'm saying? Maybe it's even worse. But there's rumors that it could be former Deputy Prime Minister Christina Freeland. Talks of former central banker Mark Carney also have been rumored, along with many other candidates within Justin Trudeau's cabinet and his closest allies. So I guess there goes Trump's offer to make him governor and Canada as the 51st state of our country. But switching back at home here, Trump just got a massive victory, guys. Now, I covered this in a previous live stream where the president-elect united the Republican Party, with House Speaker Mike Johnson just being re-elected by the very first ballot. If you know how hard it was for McCarthy to win it years ago, you would understand just how big of a deal this is. Make sure to check that one out. But as always, I appreciate you guys being here. I'll talk to you guys on the next one.